Okay, let's unpack this really intriguing puzzle we've got today. It all kicked off from a Reddit thread, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, someone studying forestry, thinking about city planning. And the core question they raised, and what we're really diving deep into for you, is this. How can our cities get more trees in the ground?
Right, because we know trees are good,
Yeah,
cooling things down.
exactly. Saving on AC, boosting mental well-being, all that. But here's the catch. How do we do that without making rents shoot up and, pushing people out?
Yeah.
Gentrification.
Ah, the big G.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is. So we've pulled together a whole stack of interesting sources here. We want to get you quickly but thoroughly up to speed.
Absolutely. It's a challenge with, well, so many layers, and we've looked at quite a range of stuff to get the full picture for you.
What have we got?
Well, beyond that initial Reddit chat, we've got reports from environmental groups, urban planning orgs. There's a study on trees and property values.
Okay.
Research on, get this, trees and crime.
Yeah. And some really fascinating stuff on tree equity, this idea of fairness in who gets shade. Plus, the latest news on funding, or lack thereof, for these planting programs.
Wow, okay, so it's all interconnected, like you said. It really feels like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube, where one twist affects everything else.
That's a good way to put it.
So let's start with that first worry, the one from Reddit that sparked this whole thing, this idea that more trees could actually maybe fuel gentrification.
Right. And what's interesting is the specific idea they floated on Reddit.
Oh,
A really, really gradual approach. Just one tree per street per year.
one tree per street per year.
Yeah. The thinking, I guess, was that such a slow pace wouldn't be enough to drastically hike property values and rents in, specific lower income areas. So hopefully no displacement.
Like a kind of greening under the radar strategy.
Sort of, yeah.
But, okay, even that super gentle approach, as the Reddit comments quickly pointed out, hit some real practical snags.
For sure. People jumped on that.
Yeah, we saw concerns about just the effort involved, like the ongoing costs, who pays for upkeep. Can city budgets and staff even handle it long term?
And the worry that maybe residents wouldn't even want them or might, remove them.
That's a point. And it brings up that really critical issue about the money side for cities, right?
Definitely. One commenter basically said, look, everyone benefits from trees, sure, but for a city watching as pennies, it just looks like another expense. Where's the immediate payback for the city itself? And others pointed out, in a lot of places, the responsibility for those sidewalk trees, it actually falls on the property owner.
Oof. Yeah, that could be a huge burden, especially for lower income folks or renters.
Exactly.
And then there were the really nitty-gritty practical problems. Someone, Mash Candy Cotton, I think, pointed out that planting just one tree isn't always simple.
Right. It's not just digging a hole.
No, you might need permits, you need special gear sometimes, you could be breaking up concrete sidewalks, maybe even changing the whole slope of the road.
A lot of hassle.
Yeah, a ton of time and money for just one tree. They suggested maybe concentrating efforts, like doing a whole street at once, might make more sense, be more efficient.
That efficiency point is good. But what also came through loud and clear was pushback against the whole idea of, not making things better just because you're scared of gentrification.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Several people basically argued, hold on, are we saying we shouldn't improve a neighborhood for the people living there now just because someone else might benefit later? That doesn't seem fair.
Right. It's like penalizing current residents. And there is this feeling, too, that a lack of trees isn't the only thing that makes a neighborhood feel neglected.
Exactly. Mash Candy Cotton put it, well, it's often a mix, right? Rundown buildings, maybe higher crime, schools needing resources.
So the argument goes, planting a few trees isn't suddenly going to flip the whole script overnight.
Precisely. And several commenters came out strong saying, plant as many trees as possible now. They argued gentrification is driven by much bigger things, like the economy, and especially the huge lack of affordable housing. That's the real engine, they argued.
Okay.
They even used parks as an example. You know how long it takes to actually build a park? Decades sometimes.
Yeah.
From the first idea to opening day. So the idea that just adding green stuff is the main cause of rising rents. It doesn't quite hold up for everyone.
That really puts the timescale in perspective, doesn't it? Hard to blame a tree planted today for rent hikes years down the line.
Right.
There was also that crucial point about getting residents involved, getting buy-in.
Oh, absolutely key.
Yeah.
People stressed that if these tree programs feel like they're just being forced on a community without any input,
They're going to fail.
yeah, they can easily fail. Residents might even take out trees they didn't ask for or feel they can't look after.
Yeah.
That sense of ownership or lack of it is huge.
Community ownership, right? If it feels imposed, not collaborative, it's probably doomed.
And circling back to the big picture, several people hammered home that point.
Yeah.
If you really want to tackle rising rents, you have to address the root cause, the lack of housing supply.
Makes sense. We also saw some pretty creative ideas for getting more trees woven into the city fabric, didn't we?
Yeah, some good suggestions. Things like focusing on pedestrian paths, bike lanes,
Uh-huh.
making sure trees are part of new construction projects, or when roads get repaved, using public land around buildings.
Oh, and incentives, like encouraging homeowners or landlords to plant trees themselves.
Right, lots of potential angles beyond just the city planting everything.
It feels like there are options.
Definitely.
Like-
And there's this undercurrent of urgency too, right, with the climate crisis.
Yeah, someone pointed that out, this one tree a year idea. Some felt it was just way too slow, given how much we need to cool cities down.
Way too incremental. Though, interestingly, one commenter flipped it, suggesting rising prices can be a sign a city is doing something right, making it desirable.
Oh, a contrarian view.
Yeah, but they also stress planting trees where they'll likely be wanted and cared for residential streets near sidewalks, not just anywhere.
Okay, so that Reddit thread really opened up this whole debate about the potential downsides, the anxieties. But let's shift gears now.
Okay.
Let's talk about the upside,
Ah.
because across all our sources, the evidence for the benefits of urban trees is just overwhelming. It goes way beyond just looking pretty.
Oh, absolutely.
If you had to pick, say, the top environmental benefits for someone listening, what stands out?
Okay, top environmental. I'd say stormwater management is huge, really huge.
How so?
Well, the leaves catch rain, right? So
Yeah.
less runs off immediately. Then the roots help the ground soak up more water. It acts like a sponge.
Okay.
And as the water filters through the soil around the roots, it actually cleans out pollutants, nitrogen, phosphorus, gunk, before it hits our rivers and lakes.
So like a natural water filter and flood control system built in?
Exactly. It's amazing green infrastructure. And then, of course, the air quality piece. Absorbing CO2, filtering out other nasty airborne pollutants. Critical for cities.
Got it. Stormwater and air quality, big ones. Now, what about health? The benefits for us?
This is striking, honestly. The research we looked at, like in that Access to Green Space article, connects green spaces to some significant health pluses.
Like what?
Things like lower risk of heart disease, less mental distress, even potentially less nearsightedness in kids.
Wow, myopia. Didn't expect that one.
Yeah. Plus, studies linking living near green areas to a lower overall risk of dying.
That's sub-significant.
It is. And then there's the heat aspect. The tree equity score research really highlights how trees combat that urban heat island effect.
Right. Cities get way hotter than surrounding areas.
They do. Trees can cool the air temperature by, up to 10, maybe even 14 degrees Fahrenheit in some studies, and surface temps like pavement even more. That has direct public health impacts.
Yeah, heat stroke, breathing problems.
Exactly. It could even potentially cut down on asthma cases by improving that air quality we mentioned.
And just having green spaces encourages people to get outside, right? Be active, socialize.
Absolutely. That came up too. Create spaces for activity, for community connection, both vital for well-being. And yeah, that growing body of work suggesting greener surroundings might actually link to longer lifespans. It's pretty compelling stuff.
It really is. The ripple effects on health are incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so environment, health. What about the money side? The economic benefits. Our listener might be surprised here.
Yeah, people often underestimate this. Economically, the impact is actually pretty substantial. Studies show trees directly boost property values.
How much are we talking?
Well, one national study put the annual impact at over $30 billion, just from trees increasing home values.
Billion with a B.
Yep. And what's really interesting is that investing in urban forests, like planting trees for stormwater management, can sometimes be cheaper for cities than building traditional concrete pipes and drains.
Cheaper than gray infrastructure.
In some cases, yeah. There was one estimate suggesting savings of over $500,000 per acre compared to conventional methods, and the return on investment, often cited as over $5 back for every $1 spent on planting and care.
Wow. $5 back for every $1 in? How?
Through all those benefits, stacking up lower energy bills from shade, cleaner air reducing health costs, stormwater management savings, increased property values contributing to the tax base, it all adds up.
So it's definitely not just about looking nice. There's a solid financial case.
A very solid case.
And you mentioned social benefits, too, that crime study.
Yeah, that was interesting. The study out of Portland suggested that larger trees, specifically street trees, might be linked to a modest reduction in crime.
Huh. Why would that be?
The thinking is maybe it signals a well-maintained, cared-for neighborhood, which can deter crime. Or perhaps just makes the street feel calmer, more pleasant.
Interesting, though there was a catch, right?
Yeah, a nuance. Smaller trees, especially on individual lots, could potentially increase crime slightly if they block views, like making it harder to see what's happening on the street or
Right.
hiding potential intruders.
Okay, so placement and type matter. It suggests we need to be thoughtful about how we design with trees, not just that we plant them.
Exactly. It's not just more trees, good, full stop. It's more complex.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked up all these amazing benefits, but we have to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the lack of trees in the room for some folks.
Right.
This issue of inequity, the shade wealth gap, as some sources call it, tree inequity. Can you give our listener the quick version of what that means?
Yeah, essentially it's the stark reality that in most cities, if you look at a map, the wealthier neighborhoods, often the predominantly white neighborhoods, have way more trees, way more canopy cover than lower income neighborhoods and communities of color.
And this isn't accidental, right? There's history here.
No, not accidental at all. Policies like redlining back in the 1930s played a huge role. Banks literally drew red lines around minority neighborhoods on maps and refused to give loans or investments there.
So disinvestment was baked in from the start.
Right, and that included things like parks and street trees. So those discriminatory practices decades ago directly contributed to the lack of green space in many of these neighborhoods today. The legacy is still very visible.
And the statistics reflecting that legacy are pretty shocking.
They really are. We saw figures like historically redlined neighborhoods often having something like 30–40% less tree cover and being significantly hotter as a result.
Hotter because fewer trees.
Directly linked. And overall, looking at demographics, neighborhoods with mostly people of color might have a third less tree cover than mostly white areas. High poverty areas, maybe 40% less than low poverty ones.
That's a massive difference in access to all those benefits, the cooling, the clean air, the health perks we just talked about.
A huge disparity. And that's where something like the tree equity score comes in.
Tell us about that. Developed by American Forests.
Yeah. It's basically a tool to measure and map this inequality. It doesn't just look at tree canopy, though. It layers in other crucial data.
Like what?
Surface temperature, sea levels, employment rates, race and ethnicity, age demographics, even health factors like asthma rates.
So it gives a much richer picture of vulnerability and need.
Exactly. It combines all that to give each neighborhood, usually census block groups, a score from 0 to 100. The lower the score, the greater the need for trees and the equity investment.
100 means perfect tree equity.
Essentially, yes.
Right.
Or at least that the area has sufficient tree cover relative to its demographic and environmental context. The goal is to get every neighborhood towards 100.
So it's a tool to pinpoint where we need to focus efforts most urgently. How are people actually using it?
In a few ways. Advocacy groups use it to make the case for more funding and resources for underserved communities.
Showing the data.
Right, showing the clear disparities. City planners can use it to guide their decisions. Where should new street trees go? Which parks need upgrades? We saw an example of, I think it was Tucson, using the score to direct their forestry program funding.
Smart. So it helps move beyond just random acts of planting towards strategic, equitable investment.
That's the goal. Targeting resources to close that gap and make sure everyone benefits.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. So we know where the need is often greatest, but actually getting more trees planted and thriving in these areas, what are the big roadblocks? And what solutions are people trying?
Well, funding is definitely number one on the obstacle list.
Always comes back to money.
Pretty much. And we saw that starkly with the recent news about federal grants for tree planting in disadvantaged communities being cut.
Oh, really? That's terrible timing.
Yeah, a real blow to organizations on the ground doing this work. Then there's the whole maintenance piece we touched on earlier. Who pays for the long-term care? Trimming, watering, dealing with leaf litter or fruit.
Or roots messing up sidewalks.
It's exactly. Infrastructure conflicts are a big one. Roots versus pipes and pavement. Utility lines getting in the way, leading to those awful hack job pruning cuts you see sometimes.
Ugh, yeah. V-cuts under power lines.
And just sheer lack of space in really dense urban cores can be a barrier. Where do you physically put a tree?
True, though I think one source mentioned something about solutions for that, like under sidewalks.
Yeah, structural cells. They're like underground frameworks that support the pavement but leave open soil volume beneath for roots to grow without buckling the sidewalk. Pretty clever engineering.
Cool. So there are technical fixes. What about getting communities engaged and making sure plantings stick?
Community involvement came up again and again as absolutely vital.
Makes sense.
Programs where residents are actually involved in the planting, maybe even the care, tend to have much better success rates. Ownership again,
Uh-huh.
offering free trees and maybe help with planting can lower the barrier for individual homeowners or renters if the landlord agrees.
Good idea. What about city policies?
Strengthening tree ordinances is key, making it harder to remove healthy trees, requiring replacements. Dedicated funding streams, obviously. Public education campaigns about why trees matter,
Right.
and choosing the right tree for the right place. Using diverse native species that are suited to the local climate, especially with climate change bringing more stress.
Good point. Thinking long term.
Yeah, and considering the whole life cycle. Staggered planting, so you don't have whole streets of trees dying off at the same time decades later, planning for continuity.
It really sounds like it needs a whole toolkit approach. Policy, money, community work, smart design, the right species.
Exactly. No single silver bullet.
Yeah.
And always, crucially, using tools like that tree equity score to make sure the resources are flowing to the neighborhoods that need them most. Closing that gap has to be central.
So wrapping this deep dive up then,
Hmm.
it's really clear that urban trees are, well, kind of amazing.
They really are powerful.
Yeah, offering this huge range of benefits, environmental, health, economic, even social. But ensuring everyone gets a fair share of those benefits and figuring out the nuts and bolts of funding and maintenance, those are still major challenges.
Absolutely. And that initial worry about gentrification. It's complex. It's a valid concern to discuss. But the consensus among many we looked at seems to be that the real driver is the housing crisis, not the trees themselves.
Right. Trees might add value, but they aren't the root cause of displacement for most people.
It seems that way. What's really striking, I think, is how this simple question, should we plant more trees, opens up Pandora's box.
Totally.
It connects to historical injustice, climate change, public health, city budgets, community dynamics. Everything is tangled together.
It really highlights how interconnected our cities are. So here's something for you, listening, to chew on. Given everything we've unpacked, the clear upsides of trees, the undeniable inequities, the practical hurdles, what can you actually do in your own neighborhood, your own city? How can you advocate for, or maybe even participate in, greening efforts that are both sustainable and fair? And what role should our local policies and funding priorities play in making sure the benefits of urban nature aren't just luxuries for some, but essentials for everyone? Definitely some food for thought there.